A moment of inner reflection you've refused to face until now. When the mirror trembles under the weight of every apology you swallowed, you remember the day they stopped chasing you. The day their silence spoke louder than any excuse. You felt exposed, your value stripped bare by your own hesitation. You replayed their words, dissected each half-truth, convinced yourself you'd find meaning in their regret. But regret is a weapon when wielded by someone who knows you'll take it back. You took it back. You forgave. You waited. And nothing changed. They didn't apologize because they were sorry. They apologized to test if you still reacted. Your calm answered them better than any outburst ever could. You learned the first truth. Power is deadened by noise. And they craved the noise you refused to give. When you stopped defending yourself, they started doubting themselves. That doubt spread like wildfire within them, yet they never admitted it. They resented the void you created. In that void, you felt naked. You felt righteous indignation clawing at your throat. But indignation is nothing more than pride clothed in outrage. You felt alone until you realized solitude is the crucible of resolve. Solitude sharpens you. It carves away every excuse you used to justify their behavior. It forges a mindset no one can compete with. Right now, you stand at the margin of a choice. Remain the open wound they poke at, or become the silence that makes them bleed. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is a statement. Silence is the barrier they can never breach. And in that silence, you find the power they never understood. If you've ever wondered what happens when you stop giving people the script to manipulate your emotions, you're about to see. Subscribe if you refuse to be the performance in someone else's story. And watch as your presence becomes the reckoning they can't ignore. They watched you shrink, waited for the moment your voice cracked, your shoulders slumped. They pressed every question, until your answers blurred into self-doubt. You felt the hunger in their gaze, that animalistic need to see you crumble. In that hunger, they thought they held your fate, but you learned to sit unmoved, letting their words ricochet off a mind untouchable. They recoiled when they realized you turned from prey into stone. They whispered your failures in corridors where secrets live. They sold your story to anyone who would listen, confident you'd defend every stain on your name. But you stayed silent. You let the echo of their lies become the only reply they heard. Silence is a mirror that shows them what they've become. In that reflection, they saw a monster born of their own making. You felt the throb of anger, raw and pulsating, begging for release. You fantasized about confrontation, that moment you'd finally scream every truth they buried. But release is a performance. The roar that escapes the cage of discipline only feeds their narrative. See how emotional they are. So you swallowed the fire. Let it burn inward until rage turned into resolve. Resolve doesn't shout, it endures. In the deep hours, you confronted every lie you'd told yourself. That your worth depended on their approval, that their respect was the forge of your identity, that forgiveness would reset the broken contract between you. Forgiveness is a leash disguised as liberation. You clipped it off. You watched it fall to the ground, heavy and useless. And you realized the only contract you'll ever honor is the one you make with yourself. They tried to bait you with nostalgia fragments of better days when loyalty felt mutual. They showed you photos where smiles masked the coming storm. They said, "Remember who you used to be." But memory is a weapon they wielded to fracture your present. You reclaimed your past, stripped it of its gilded lies. You honored the truth, that those smiles hid calculations, that loyalty was a currency they spent on whim. You buried sentiment beneath clarity. Power isn't found in the blade you wield. It's felt in the calm you maintain when the blade is at your throat. You learned to carry that calm like armor. The world sees a placid face and assumes weakness. They assume a dam contains anguish until it bursts. But you're the dam, unyielding, unbreakable. Let them test your limits. Let them find the emptiness they expected, but discover the strength you forged there. You noticed how their tone changed when they realized you'd mastered your silence. They spoke slower, as if each word carried new weight. Their strategies became clumsy, transparent. They whispered fewer rumors, sent fewer jabs. In the space they vacated, you reclaimed ground they'd stolen. You occupied the territory of your own potential, no longer waiting for permission. When they apologized again, it hung in the air like a hollow token. You didn't move. You let the token drop. They learned that tokens mean nothing unless you decide they do. They needed a reaction to sell their remorse. You gave them none. Your stillness spoke volumes. You decide what matters. You discovered that the fiercest battles are fought in the quiet, between two heartbeats. In that stillness, you choose your next move. You choose not to beg for acknowledgement. You choose to build a fortress of self-respect. You choose to become the unshakable presence in every room you enter. They'll try again. They'll adjust their tactics, new rumors, feigned vulnerability, the promise of redemption. But you've studied their playbook. You know every move before it arrives. You'll sit across from them, gaze unwavering, and watch as they realize they've already been outplayed. Because you didn't need to teach yourself power. You needed to unlearn the praise response. This is the first layer of your transformation. You're not done. The wrongdoers around you are recalibrating, scrambling to breach walls they once scaled. But those walls stand firm. You carved them in silence, hardened by self-control. And they will never know the full shape of your strength until you choose to reveal it, or until they collapse trying. They told themselves you'd break when they introduced a new consequence: loss of status, withdrawal of favor, exposure of your secrets. They believed power lives in threats. But you discovered power lives in the choice to feel nothing. You watched their faces shift when mockery met indifference. Their threats fell away like dead leaves in a harsh wind. You stood rooted. You noticed the subtle calculations in every smile they offered, the way their eyes measured your reaction, hunting for cracks. You returned their smiles with the same quiet intensity you reserve for storm. They hesitated. No one hesitates before a hurricane. They backed down from questions that once cornered you, mistaking your calm for vulnerability. Calm isn't absence of emotion. Calm is mastery of it. They attempted to weaponize guilt again, reminding you of your past mistakes, of moments you regret. They whispered tales of who you were at your lowest, hoping to resurrect shame. But shame is a ghost you exorcised when you stopped defining yourself by their standards. You acknowledged your past, but you refused to give it dominion over your present. You watched guilt dissolve against the wall of your conviction. You felt the temptation to expose their hypocrisies, to dismantle their narratives with precision. But exposure is a spectacle, and spectacles feed the appetite for drama. You refused to perform. Instead, you leaned into brevity, delivering truths so concise they resonated like a bell toll. In that resonance, they heard the echo of every lie they told themselves, and that echo frightened them more than any public humiliation could. You remember the last time someone tried to break you, with kindness feigned compassion wrapped in manipulation. They pressed soft hands against your shoulder, whispered assurances they never intended to honor. You absorbed the warmth for a moment before instinct snapped you back. Warmth without integrity is the coldest weapon of all. You stepped away from the embrace, leaving them clutching the air. They realized too late that warmth has to be earned, not offered as bait. In private moments, you confronted your own vulnerabilities, those subtleties no one could touch, because you buried them beneath layers of self-analysis. You asked, what if you lose all attachments? What if every expectation crumbles? You stared into that abyss until the edges sharpened. In the sharpening, you found clarity. Attachments are the chains they cling to when they want to move you. Remove the chains, and they have nothing to hold. They attempted to provoke you with nostalgia, a promise that the past held the key to your happiness. They played old recordings of laughter, recycled memories as if nostalgia were a currency. You watched those memories with surgical detachment, appreciating their detail without granting them power. Nostalgia is the past's illusion of safety. You discarded the illusion. You felt the weight of expectation from others who hadn't witnessed your transformation, the ones who begged you to be yourself, unaware that yourself had become a concept they once owned. You refused to resurrect that version of yourself. You became the unknown variable in their equations. You became a force they couldn't predict. You learned to harness absence as a tool. Absence forces introspection in those left behind. When you withdraw, you expose the emptiness they filled with projections, pity, demands. Absence reveals the hollowness of their motives. They scramble to fill the silence, only to discover the silence doesn't need filling. Power, you realized, isn't about domination. Domination is fleeting like sand slipping through clenched fists. Power is persistence. It's the slow erosion of old dynamics until a new foundation rises, one built on self-determination and fierce autonomy. They can't tear down stone with words. They can't divert a river that follows its course. They will test you again, as they test every barrier they encounter. But barriers crumble not from force, but from refusal to yield. In your refusal, you've constructed a fortress no strategy can penetrate. Their efforts become transparent, their intentions laid bare. They no longer surprise you. They no longer unsettle you. This revelation marks another layer peeled away. You're closer to the core they fear, the unmoving will that refuses to bow. You've learned that true power is internal, immune to their tactics. In every whispered threat, every faux apology, every forced reconciliation, you find the same truth. They can only harm you if you give them permission. And you never will. They leaned into their last resort public exposure. They leaked fragments of your failures to the crowd, confident the crowd would devour your humanity like vultures. You watched the flames they stoked, a feast of judgment. You stepped forward, unburned, your gaze steady. Flames flicker against unflinching steel and die. They realized you were impervious. They invited pity, orchestrating a spectacle of vulnerability to ensnare your allies. Photos of you at your lowest moments, words torn from context, everything designed to make you seem broken. You observed their theater from the wings, knowing every cue. You never entered the stage. Absence is the deadliest irony. When you refuse to play, their performance collapses. Beneath the surface, you felt the tremor of doubt, a whisper that maybe this time the tide would turn. Doubt is the last gate before self-sabotage. You faced it head-on, naming it as your creation, nothing more than fear dressed in familiar clothes. You offered it no dialogue, no shelter. You watched it retreat, shrinking until it disappeared. In that void, you encountered a new adversary. The hunger for validation from unknown witnesses, the desperate urge to prove your integrity. You recognized it as the same hunger that once drove you to defend every slight, to beg for approval with trembling words. You crushed it underfoot. You felt its bones shatter, and with them, the compulsion to perform for ghosts. They shifted tactics next, silent alliances. They whispered in corridors you once walked, forging coalitions behind your back. They believed numbers would overwhelm your solitude. You infiltrated their alliances with silence, refusing to seize the sword they thrust at you. They brandished numbers like a spear, convinced quantity trumped quality. You understood that true strength lies not in crowds, but in conviction. Their alliances splintered when met with indifference. They attempted to seduce you with promises of reinstatement, restoration of status, return to favor. Their words dripped with honey, but honey masquerades as poison if you've tasted its source. You let their promises hang in the air, heavy and meaningless. You chose the bitterness of truth over the sugar of concession. In moments of solitude, you felt the ache of ending cycles, knowing that every relationship you've severed carried a fragment of your history. You confronted that ache without flinching. You acknowledged the cost of your transformation: familiarity, comfort, the illusion of certainty. You measured the price and found it negligible compared to the currency of self-sovereignty. They unleashed the last echo: fear of isolation. They painted you as a pariah, a figure cut off from every refuge. They assumed you needed networks as much as they did, but networks are built on shared vulnerabilities. You carry none. You stand alone not because you're rejected, but because you refuse dependency. In your isolation, you discovered solidarity with yourself, the one ally whose allegiance never wavers. They hurled confusion next, streaming contradictory messages until meaning dissolved into white noise. They believed chaos would scatter your resolve. But chaos is another battlefield where discipline wins. You listened to the cacophony and discerned patterns, each contradiction a confession of their desperation. You let the noise wash over you, unshaken, leaving them tangled in their own contradictions. Now they confront a truth more potent than any threat. You've become the architect of your destiny. You no longer react to their moves because your moves are conceived in advance. You draw fortifications before battles begin. You strike before invitations are extended. You govern your perceptions, and in that sovereignty, you wield every advantage. They look upon you and see not a person, but an immovable monolith. You've stripped every tactic of its potency: fear, guilt, pity, obligation, memory, promise, alliance, chaos. You reduce them all to shadows against the unwavering flame of your own will. They grasp at straws, pleading for cracks that no longer exist. They curse the silence you've mastered, the absence you wield as a blade, the calm that defies every storm they conjure. This layer of your evolution stands unchallenged for now. They recalibrate, gathering shards of strategy to hurl anew. But they face a revelation they cannot escape. Power governed by principle is invincible because principle never falters. When your foundation is unshakable, every assault becomes meaningless. And when they realize this, they will know they've faced something beyond competition. They waited out your patience. Betting time would erode your defiance. They whispered that only persistence breaks stone, that fatigue is the true victor. They let days stretch into weeks, confident your resolve would fray. In the silence of their absence, they thought you would bend, return to the rituals of engagement, the familiar cycle of defense and apology. But time is not their ally. Time is yours. You learn to stretch every moment into an affirmation of sovereignty. They deployed the slow drip of favors, small concessions that felt like kindness, but carried the weight of obligation. A message of concern, an offer to talk things through. They thought generosity would soften your steadiness. Yet generosity without respect is another form of control. You accepted nothing. You let their favors rot in the inbox. Unsigned, unacknowledged, your unresponsiveness turned their kindness into guilt. A reminder that favors demand reciprocation, a pact you refused to sign. They introduced the tactic of curiosity. We need your input. Your insight changed everything. They flattered your intellect, appealed to your desire for influence. But influence granted by manipulators is a leash. You declined every invitation cloaked in flattery. Your silence became your message. You will not be baited by vanity. They attempted to redefine the boundary, recasting the narrative of who you are. You've changed, they said, as if transformation were criticism. They framed your growth as betrayal. They mourned an earlier version of you, the one they controlled. You watched them struggle to reconcile the person they loved when you were reactive with the person you became when you mastered yourself. You didn't argue. You allowed their confusion to stand as testament to their reliance on your old self. In quiet moments, you confronted a deeper question. What remains when every link to the past is severed? You sat with that emptiness and discovered a new horizon. Emptiness is freedom, no scripts, no expectations, no foreshadowing. It is infinite possibility. You felt a surge of potential, the kind that demands creation without permission. They circulated rumors of your downfall, whispering that isolation would consume you, that no one stands alone without cracking. They broadcast tales of loneliness, expecting pity to spill into your world. Instead, you embraced solitude as a crucible. In the forge of solitude, you reshaped your identity from brittle vulnerability into tempered resilience. They tried one last ploy, the illusion of choice. They offered compromises, partial forgiveness, tentative alliances, small acknowledgments of wrongdoing. They framed it as your decision. You can have peace if you meet us halfway. But peace imposed is submission. You saw the trap. You refused to meet halfway. You chose the whole path of self-determination. In the final gambit, they resorted to silence so profound it vibrated with accusation. No messages, no rumors, no favors, only void. They assumed absence would speak louder than words, but you had seen absence for what it is, a canvas for projection. They projected their need onto you. You offered them a reflection, your own silence. You met void with void, a mirror showing them the hollowness of their strategies. This culmination of tactics, time, favors, flattery, nostalgia, rumors, silence was meant to fracture your mind. Instead, it revealed the architecture of your own power. You traced each tactic back to its source, fear of losing control, and you understood that control is an illusion. What remains when control slips away is pure will. Now you stand beyond competition, beyond their influence, beyond the need to react. You govern your world by presence, not by approval. Every tactic they deploy is a lesson you've already learned. You anticipate before you respond. You choose before you act. You build before they propose. You exist not as a contestant in their games, but as the designer of your own rules. You have reached a threshold few experience. They call you unbreakable because they have nothing left to test. You carry within you the calm of someone who has seen every stratagem and refused it. You possess a mind that neither flinches nor forgives by default. You are the embodiment of psychological sovereignty. You've stripped every tactic of its power until they circle empty-handed, confronting the fact that you're neither prey nor participant in their scheme. You stand apart, a testament to a will unswayed by threats, guilt, or enticement. In that solitude, you've unearthed a principle more potent than any tactic: sovereignty of self. No plea, no favor, no apology can reach you, because your allegiance lies within your own boundaries. This is the moment you realize power isn't seized, it's claimed through absence of compromise. They believed power lived in leverage over you, but they failed to see it was always in your refusal to be leveraged. Every withdrawal, every silence, every unyielding pause has carved the shape of your mastery. They reshuffled their strategies, only to find the board empty, their pieces irrelevant. Now you exist beyond competition, in a realm they cannot touch, where your decisions aren't reactions, but declarations of intent. You've become the standard they measure themselves against. Unwavering, unreadable, unassailable. They may rebuild their arsenals, but they will never breach the citadel you erected in the space between impulse and reaction. If you've witnessed your own transformation in these words, comment the word unshakable and let the world know sovereignty isn't given, it's taken.